In order to reach any goal, one must know the obstacles, the bumps that stand in the way of success. Our goal here is to understand academic lectures. I want to talk about a few reasons why academic lectures at times is so challenging. This information was reported in a mega study done in 2010 by the University of Maryland, and it was titled, "What Makes Listening Difficult?" I will share parts of that study with you now. Firstly, I'll talk about characteristics of the lecture that affect how well an ESL student understands the information. Then I'll discuss characteristics of the learner that affect how well he or she is able to understand the information. Let's begin. Think about a lecture that was easy to understand. Now think of a lecture that was difficult to understand. In each lecture, how familiar were you with the topic? Was the speaker on topic? Did the speaker speak clearly? This study refers to 3 characteristics or features of a lecture that affect how easy or how difficult the lecture was to understand. The first is how complex or complicated the lecture is. The complexity of the lecture is determined by how advanced the grammar, the sentence structure, the vocabulary, and ideas are, as well as how much cultural information is included that the learner is not aware of. For example, if the speaker says, "We need to educate students to prevent the freshman 15," a student would not understand the point being made unless they knew that the freshman 15 commonly means the weight that's gained by a student the first year of college. Organization is the second characteristic that determines the difficulty of a lecture. If the speaker uses discourse markers, or sometimes called signal words, to guide the audience through the lecture is much easier to understand. Common discourse markers include first, second, third, because, on the other hand, for example, finally. Redundancy and repetition of the same word or concept is another aspect of organization that helps make the information easier to understand in a lecture. When a speaker is not organized, on the other hand, and talks about things that are not directly related to the topic, the lecture is difficult to follow and difficult to understand. Lastly, how the speaker delivers the lecture is a third characteristic that determines how easy or how difficult the lecture is. If the speaker speaks with an accent that the students aren't familiar with, or if the speaker speaks too fast, or too quietly, or not clearly enough, the students may have a more difficult time understanding the lecture. Moving on to the learner characteristics that affect the difficulty of a lecture. First, and most obviously, the language ability of a student and his or her experience listening to lectures affect how difficult the lecture will be. The more fluent you are in a language and the more classroom experience that you have, the easier it will be to understand. Secondly, if a student's nervous or worried or doesn't think that he or she can understand the lecture, then the information from the lecture will be more difficult. It's much better if the student is relaxed and confident. And finally, students who use strategies as they listen to lectures generally understand the lecture much better than students who do not. Some important listening and note-taking strategies include doing reading about the lecture topic before the lecture and knowing what words to expect. Another strategy is not to translate the lecture into their native language. And thirdly, listening for the main idea of the lecture and reviewing the lecture notes after class. Knowing what you are up against will help you prepare for the challenge of understanding lectures a little bit better. In this short talk, we talked about characteristics of the lecture and those of the learner that affect how difficult a lecture may be. You can't change the lecture, but you can improve yourself. Take the time to learn some language skills, to relax, and to take the time to learn some good old listening and note-taking strategies.